Good morning, guys. In the last session, we discussed about what is Spring Security. We discussed about what is Spring Security, and we discussed about what is authentication and what is authorization. What is authentication? Authentication represents who can access our application. Authorization represents who can access which functionality in our application. And we discussed about HTTP basic auth. What is the meaning of HTTP basic auth? It will generate some random credentials to access our application. If you don't want those credentials, then we can override those credentials also. Then we have seen in-memory authentication. What is the meaning of in-memory authentication? Instead of configuring only one user, we can configure multiple users in our application programmatically for the authentication purpose. Then instead of hard coding the users in the application, we can go for JDBC authentication. Users can be inserted in the database table and we can perform the authentication based on the SQL queries which we are configuring in the application. So this is what we have done in the previous sessions. So today application is very important. We are going to implement registration functionality and a login functionality by using Spring Security. So in the previous examples, in the project batch also, login and registration we have done directly without using Spring Security. We are taking the data from the form, we are storing in the database table. When user is trying to log in, we are retrieving the record from the database table. We are checking the records are matching with the given data or not. If it is valid, then login is successful. Otherwise, login is failure. Now today, what we are going to do is we are going to implement login and registration functionality with the help of Spring Security. So when we are going to develop this application, the data we need to insert in the database table. Here, I'm going to use the data JPA only to communicate with the database table. For the registration purpose, data JPA, that means record should be inserted into the table when the user is registered. When user is trying to log in, we need to retrieve the record from the database table. For that, we are going to use data JPA. When we are using data JPA, repository will be created. There will be a repository. That repository is going to extend from the JPA repository and it is going to communicate with our database table. Okay, extends from the JPA repository. Then here guys, we are going to create one REST controller. We are going to create one REST controller. Inside this REST controller, I'm going to take two methods. One is for user registration. Another one is for user login. User registration will be available. User login will be available. Now, controller will not communicate with the repository directly. We are going to use a concept called service concept. So here, I'm going to create my app service or my user detail service, some service. I'm going to create my service. Here, our service is not a normal service now because controller is going to communicate with the service communicate with the repository. That is old style. Now, here we need to use Spring Security to perform our operations. So that's why what we do is our service is going to extend the properties from a predefined service available in the Spring Security, which is called user details service. Whatever the service we are creating, our service will extend the properties from a service called user details service. In that, that is an interface basically. My service is going to implement that interface and override the method. Along with this, we are going to create one more important class. That class is called configuration class. So what is that? We are going to create our security configuration class. This is a little challenging concept here we are going to create one security configuration class. In this security configuration class, we need to define lot of beans. So the first one, we need to define password encoder, because we are not going to store the password directly in the database. Before storing the password, we need to encode that password. Password encoder concept will be available. Along with this password encoder, we are going to specify authentication manager or authentication provider. Authentication provider will be available. That means who is going to take care of the authentication in the application, that we are going to, how the data will be coming for the authentication from the database, right? So for that, we are going to configure authentication provider. Instead of we are validating the credentials are valid or not, we are going to use a concept called authentication manager. Authentication manager will be available. And to customize the security, we are going to use security filter. Filter chain bean will be available. That security filter chain we are going to use. Password encoder will be available. Authentication provider will be available. Authentication manager will be available. And filter chain also will be available. These 5 beans we are going to configure. One is password encoder. Second one is authentication provider. Third one is authentication manager. And fourth one is security filter chain we are going to configure. And in this REST controller application, we are going to configure 2 methods. One is register method, another one is login method. So registration method is going to insert the record into database by talking to the repository. When we are inserting the record, we don't insert the record as it is. We need to encrypt the password and we are going to insert that record. Then what about the login functionality? Do we need to write the logic for the login, or security will take care of the login functionality? Spring Security is going to take care of our login functionality. So here, and we need one entity class also. We are going to use one entity class also. What is the purpose of that entity? For table mapping. So our repository will be using this entity for the table mapping. Insert the data, retrieve the data based on the entity. Are you guys clear? Look at this architecture. So we need to develop this application registration and login functionality with the help of Spring Security. So when we want to develop this application with the Spring Security, then we need to create one service class. What our service is going to do? Our service is implementing one predefined service available in the Spring, that is called user details service. And we are going to create one security configuration class also. Inside the security configuration class, we are going to configure password encoder. What is the purpose of the password encoder? What is the purpose of password encoder? Password encoder is used to encrypt our password. Then what is the authentication provider? For the authentication provider, we will tell from where the data is going to come. Who will give the data for us? Repository will give the data for us. So we are going to establish the link between authentication provider and repository. I will tell to my authentication provider, boss, the data you need to retrieve from the database by using data JPA. To retrieve the data from the data JPA, you are not going to retrieve directly with the repository. Authentication provider will communicate with this service. This service is going to communicate with the repository. So there will be a link between authentication provider and service. Service is going to communicate with the repository. Then what is authentication manager here? What is the role of authentication manager? To perform the authentication, verify credentials are valid or not. If credentials are valid, allow them to log in into the application. If credentials are invalid, don't allow them to log in into the application. Are you guys clear? Now, so let me note down what are the components that we are going to build in this project. So mainly coming to the security topic I'm talking about, we are going to create one My App service. my app service. This my app service is going to communicate with user details interface. User details service interface is available. This interface is a predefined interface in the Spring Security, which is used to load the user data. I'm going to implement this predefined interface by using our service class. Okay. Then next one, password encoder will be available. So here we are going to use bcrypt password encoder for encrypting our password. Before inserting the record, that password should be encrypted. Okay. Then next one, here we are going to configure a bean called authentication provider. What is the bean authentication provider? Here we are going to set service and password encoder for the authentication provider. I'm telling to authentication provider, data will be coming from the service. Service will get it from the repository. Password is available in the encrypted format. So this authentication provider also should use that encryption concept. Then next one, we are having a concept called authentication manager. What is the role of authentication manager in the Spring Security? Validate credentials. Validate credentials. Basically, this class is going to perform authentication. Login checking will be done by this class only. Then we are having security filter chain. What is the purpose of security filter chain? Customize the authentication and authorization which is available in the Spring Security. So what I am going to tell, so here /register and /login will be available. /register and /login will be available. Allow both URLs. So registration anybody can do. Login anybody can try. So if the credentials are valid, they will be accessing our application. If credentials are invalid, they cannot access our application. So these are the components we are going to use. Along with this, we are going to create one REST controller. That's it. Now look at this. What is the service here? We are going to implement a service called user detail service. This is going to communicate with our repository. Our repository is going to communicate with database to retrieve the data. Then password encoder, which is used to encrypt our password. Authentication provider, we are going to set service bean and password encoder bean. Set service bean and password encoder bean for the authentication provider. Authentication manager, which is used to validate the user credentials. Security filter chain. Whenever we add the security dependency, by default all the URLs will be secured in our application. But in this project, I have only two URLs. One is register URL, another one is login URL. I need to allow both. Anybody can register, anybody can try to log in. If their data is valid, they can log in. If the data is invalid, they cannot log in. So I need to customize the configuration to allow both URL patterns. Yep. So security configuration is a little challenging in this project, guys, because we are not going to do the authentication. Authentication will be taken care by Spring Security. In the Spring Security, to perform the authentication, we need authentication manager. When we want to use authentication manager, we need to configure authentication provider. When we are configuring authentication provider, we need to configure service and password encoder. Look at this diagram. One user data will be in one table. If you want roles, then you need to go for two tables. Got it? Good. Now I have documented, guys, the steps what we need to follow in order to develop this application. So as I told you, security configuration is a little confusing here. In the security configuration, we are going to configure password encoder bean, and we are going to configure users. Users are coming from the service. Okay. Then authentication manager builder is available. Security filter chain is available. authentication provider is available, and authentication manager is available. So this is security configuration is a little challenging in this application. So let's do this step by step. Create the boot application with required dependencies. So let's go to our project. Let's build this application and test it. Yes, practice is required for this. Security is not that much easy in the Spring. And that too, another problem with this Spring security is whenever a boot version is changing, some classes are changing. So whatever the things that worked in the boot 2.x version, they are not working in the 3.x version. They have deprecated a lot of classes which are available in the 2.x. Earlier, when we want to do the security, we need to extend the properties from a class called security adapter. But now that is deprecated. It's not working. So everything we need to customize like this now. So let's create one more project from the scratch. Let's build that project, guys. 53 application, new Spring Starter project, Spring Security Login Registration project. Maven and Java 17. Yeah. So what are the dependencies that we need to use to build this application? Web starter for creating the REST controllers, data JPA starter to communicate with database using repository, then MySQL connector, security starter, and DevTools dependencies are required. So I'm selecting web starter, I'm selecting security starter, and let's select JPA also, data JPA, then MySQL connector and DevTools dependency to restart the server. Okay, Spring Boot DevTools I am using. Are you clear? Good. DevTools to reload the server, JPA to communicate with the database, driver to communicate with that particular database, security to perform authentication and authorization, then web dependency is available for the REST controllers. Click on next and click on finish. So with this our project is created. With this our project is created. Once the project is created, let us configure data source properties. With which database we want to communicate. We are going to communicate with a MySQL database. So let us configure the database properties. In the previous application also we configured that in the YML file. So we are going to communicate with the same database. Let me take the same database. Yeah. Security register and login application. Properties file is available. Let me convert that from properties file to YML file. In this YML, let us configure the data. Okay, we are going to communicate with the MySQL database SBMS36. Now, here we need to create required entity class and repository interface. Create the entity class and repository interface. So let's create one entity, table mapping, new class. So let me take this class name as entity. I'm taking it as customer class, anything. You can take any table for that one. So I'm taking some information, integer, customer ID, private string, customer name. I mean to say customer username, and customer password and customer phone number. So this is the data I want in the table. ID, username, password, and phone number. Email, gender, date of birth. If you want, you can take other data also. Now I am going with these 4 fields. So make it as an entity class by using @entity annotation. No need to map with the table. Automatically it will take class name as a table name. And we need to have a primary key by using @ID annotation. And I'm using generated value. For this I'm going to specify strategy as a identity generator. What is the meaning of identity generator? Auto increment will work for us. Now let us generate setters and getters. Select all, click on generate. So I'm generating setters and getters for this entity. This is clear. Now let us create one repository interface. New interface. let us create this as customer repository. Customer repository created. So this repository is going to extend the properties from either CRUD repository or JPA repository. Anything is fine for us. Customer repository primary key, which is a integer. Primary key is a integer. Now, so specifying @repository annotation optional. When we are extending the properties from JPA repository, specifying this annotation is optional. By default, as part of this bootstrapping, this interface will be recognized as a JPA interface. Implementation will be provided by data JPA. Perfect. Next one. Guys, here in the data JPA, predefined methods available. Save method available, save all method, find by ID, find all, delete, delete by ID, delete all methods available. Now, in the Spring, when we want to perform the authentication, we need to retrieve the record based on the username. We need to retrieve the record based on the username. So username is a primary key or username is not a primary key. Username is not a primary key. So then how to retrieve the record based on the username now? Find by method. Can we write a find by method now? Can we write a find by method? Yes. Tell me how to write the find by method. Public customer find by name. Find by customer name. Okay. So I'm going to write this method find by customer name. So with the given name, if the customer record is available, it is going to return that entity object. Find by customer name is available. If record is available, it will return that object for us. That's it. So any confusion so far? Any confusion so far? No. We don't have any confusion so far. We are able to create one entity and we are able to create one repository also. Then now let me create one config class also, guys. That is where we are going to perform our security configuration, right? So I'm going to create one class, app security config class. I'm taking a class with a name called app security config class. Here I'm going to write one annotation called @configuration. So that is representing our Java class as a configuration class. Next, let us go for security. I'm writing enable web security. Enable web security. Here I want to configure password encoder as a bean. So when we are registering the user, we need one password. So I'm going to configure one password encoder. So let us create that as a bean. Public password encoder given by Spring, that is password encoder. So we are going to return new bcrypt password encoder. So I'm going to use bcrypt encoder mechanism to encrypt our password in the application. So I'm writing one method. In this method, I'm creating the object bcrypt password encoder and I'm using @bean annotation. What is the meaning of @bean annotation? What is the meaning of @bean? Come on. We are going to represent this one as a Spring Bean. We are going to represent this as a Spring Bean. That's it. Okay. So now here I am going to create one REST controller. Let us create one class with a name called REST controller. So that is customer REST controller. Customer REST controller. In this class, let me use one annotation called @REST controller. In this REST controller, I will write one method public string create customer. Create customer or customer registration, or I can say register customer. Register customer. I want to get the customer data. Customer data will be coming in the JSON format. So let me take that JSON data as a request body. So if we are expecting the data in the request body, then we need to map it as a post mapping. We need to map it as a post mapping, I'm taking the URL pattern as /register. I want to save this data into database. I want to save this data into database. So to do that, let me use my repository. What is the repository we have? We are having customer repository. Customer repository object is available. So how to inject the customer repository object? By using auto wiring. Now, if I do like this, what will happen? If I do like this, what will happen? Customer record will be inserted into database table. After inserting this record, I'm going to say that customer registered, or I can say user registered, anything. Customer registered or user registered. User registered. But what is the problem in this approach? Password we are storing as it is in the database. We will store the password as it is in the database. We should not store the password as it is in the database. We should not store the password as it is in the database. So what we need to do? Encrypt our password. For encrypting the password, what we will use? Password encoder. We have already created the password encoder bean in our application. Now I need this password encoder bean to encrypt our password. So what I will do is private password encoder, private password encoder. Let us go for auto wiring. I got the password encoder object. Then what we do before saving this data? C dot set customer password, C dot set customer password with a password encoder dot encode C dot get customer password. So what I am doing now? What I am doing now? I am in already customer object we are getting, guys. Already customer object we are getting in the request body. That customer object will get the plain password. The general password will be coming. That general password, what I am doing? Password encoder dot encode customer dot get password. So what this method is going to do? This is going to encode the password and it is going to return the password for us. That password we are setting back to the same object. From that object, I'm taking the password, I'm encoding that password, and I'm setting the password back to the same object. After setting the password to the same object, then what we are doing? We are saving the customer object. So then it is going to say user registration completed successfully. Password encoder object we are using here. Password encoder dot encode our password. So whatever customer object is there, in general you can do like this also. If you are confused here, you can do like this. When I call this method, what it is going to give me? It is going to give me encoded password. That encoded password I'm setting back to the same customer object. So we are getting the original password in the request. User will give the original password. I'm taking that original password, I'm encoding that password, I'm setting to the same object again. I'm overriding the old original password with the encoded password. That's it. I'm taking the original password, I'm encoding. I'm replacing that original password with the encoded password. Then I am calling repository.save. Then user registered message will be coming back to us. Are you able to follow me? Yes. So with this, we completed just to registration functionality. Can we test this registration functionality? Is record is creating or not? Yeah. So I have created, observe, I created the project, then I created one entity, then I created one repository, in that one find by method available, and I created one security configuration class. In that I just configured password encoder. That's it. What is this password encoder? Bcrypt password encoder. What we will do with the bcrypt password encoder? We are inserting the record into table when the registration is happen. Before inserting this record, what I am doing? Before inserting this record, what I am doing? I am encoding the password and I am doing the registration. Customer name and customer username, customer password. Let me remove this CU name password, customer ID, username, password, and phone number. Let me regenerate the setters and getters. Just variable names I am changing. Then it will be find by username. This is set password. Okay, this is get password. The variable naming convention not looking good. Here also find by, what is the method now? Find by username. That's it. So one entity is available, one repository is available, configuration class is available, and the REST controller is also available. Now, if you see in our YML file, we have configured database credentials. Okay, SBMS 36 database we are using. Connect with MySQL database. Connect with MySQL database. Use this database. Show the tables. Currently, we have some tables. Do we have any table with a name called customer? There is no table available with a name called customer. Now, table should be created. How the table should be created? How the table should be created? What property we need to write, guys? DDL auto. jpa.hibernated.ddl auto. I'm going to write this one as a update. JPA show SQL is true. Then spring dot jpa dot hibernated dot ddl auto. We are giving this one as a update. What is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of DDL auto update? If table is not available, then it should create the table also. Perfect. Now, refresh, update Maven project. Maven, update the project. Force update. Connected with the database. In the database, currently there is no table available with a name called customer, saying that customer table does not exist. Then run this project, run as boot application. Application started. Yeah, you can see the table is created successfully. Go to the database and verify, select star from customer. So table is created, but the data is not available in the table. Now, we have a REST controller, which is expecting a post request with the customer data in the request body. ID we no need to send because it is a primary key value. We need to send only 3 values: username, password, and phone number. In which format? JSON format. So let me open Postman tool. Let me open Postman tool. Let me send post request to save the customer. Get request is there, but I want to go for post request 8081/register. Data authentication, no auth now. Headers concept is there. Body JSON data. So I need to spend username, some value, password, key value pair. JSON will represent the data in the key value. Password I'm going to give as ABC. Then phone number. Phone number we are giving as 1234. So this is my JSON data. Okay. Yeah, fine. Perfect. So this is my JSON data. I want to send this JSON data in the request body for this URL pattern. This is a post request method. Observe carefully. In my console, clear the console. Now let me send the request. Click on send. What happened now? 401 unauthorized. What it is saying? Boss, you can't access that method. Why we can't access that method? Security is available for our application. Now, anybody who are trying to register, can we ask them to send the credentials? Is it recommended to ask the credentials? Why? First of all, they have not yet created. First of all, they don't even have the account. Then how can you ask the credentials for them? How can you say that they are unauthorized to access that URL? Registration page should be public, right? Everybody should be able to register in your application. You should not ask them to give the credentials for the registration. That's not possible. So then what we need to do, Spring Security is working as brainless fellow now. Every method it is using for the security. Now what we need to tell to Spring Security? Hey, don't secure this URL. This should be public URL. You need to allow this URL. Anybody should be able to access this URL. How can we tell to Spring Security to allow this URL? Filter chain we have to customize. What we will tell in the filter chain? What we will tell in the filter chain? You permit this request. You permit this request. Okay. So let's go to our security configuration. In that security configuration, we need to configure one bean. That means which is a filter chain. So let us write it. Let's stop this server. Let's write it. Public security filter chain is available. That is a security filter. For this, we are going to take HTTP security as a parameter. HTTP security as a parameter. So what we need to do in this is security filter chain. We need to customize this security filter chain bean. So what we need to tell in this method, what logic we need to write in this method? HTTP dot CSRF dot disable dot authorize request dot and authorize request dot any request dot matchers, any request permit all. Okay, permit all, then dot build. And build. Return this. Throws exception. So now I'm writing some logic here. I'm telling to permit all the HTTP requests which are coming to our application. Now let's try this. Refresh, clear the console, run as boot application. Yeah, clear the console. Now go to the browser, check in the database. Any record is available now? No record is available. Send the request. When I send the request now, what it is saying? Earlier it is saying unauthorized. At that time, all the URLs are secured. Now this particular URL is not secured. We are telling to permit the request which is coming to this application. Then here we are going to see one insert query is executed. So data JPA we are using to save the data by using save method. Now go to our database, check the record is available or not. Select star from customer. Can you see the customer record is inserted? Customer ID one populated. That is the identity auto increment happened. Phone number is inserted. Password. Password inserted directly or it is encrypted now. By using bcrypt algorithm, it is encrypted before saving. So it's saved with the encryption technique. My username is also available. So I know my original password is ABC, but in the database, it is not stored as ABC. It has applied some encryption technique before saving the record. So that encryption who has done? Programmer has done that encryption by using that bcrypt algorithm. So here, bcrypt configuration I have done here as a Spring Bean. In my REST controller, I have injected that password encoder. I have encoded my password. I set that password to the entity object. Then I called save method with the entity. Then my record is inserted into database table. So with this, one customer record is saved in the database. Now the problem is login functionality. So earlier, how do we do the login? That just with the user, write a find by method with the username and password, retrieve the record. If it is valid, user login success. If the record is available with the given username and password, login success. With the given username and password, if record is not available, login is failed. That is a traditional approach, old approach to implement the login. But now, How do we need to implement the login? With the help of Spring Security. Lot of configuration is required here. If you want to implement login with the Spring Security, lot of configuration is required. Before going for that login, are you clear with the registration now? Any confusion? Simple, what we have done? We created one entity which is mapped with the database table, and we created one repository, and we created one configuration class. What we have done in the configuration? Password encoder bean we configured, security filter chain we have customized. What is my security filter chain is doing now? Permit any request which is coming, you allow that. I'm permitting all the requests which are coming. I will have only 2 methods. Suppose if I have 10 methods, I want to allow only login and register. Then I can configure. You allow only these 2 URLs. Remaining URLs you should not allow. That also we can customize that. Then here REST controller is available. Inside the REST controller, I have injected my repository bean. I have injected my passworded encoder bean. Password encoder is used to encode our password, which is bcrypt password encoder we have already created as a Spring Bean. Repository we are using to save the data. Completed. Now let us go for login functionality. So in order to go for the login functionality, come back to our diagram. Password encoder is already available. Filter chain is also already available. Now what we need to configure? Authentication provider, authentication manager, service class we need to create. First, let me create a service class. What is the purpose of the service? To load the user data based on the username. How we are going to create the service here? Normal service or Spring service? Spring service. Let us create that service. So create new class my user details service. My user details service. A class I'm creating in a service package. Click on finish. So this is normal service. Okay, stop the server. This is a normal service. So let me represent this one. As a Spring Bean. How to represent this as a Spring Bean? @service. Now implements user details service. Where that user details service is available? Spring Security, a class or interface. So we are implementing this interface. When we implement this interface, we need to override one method. What is that method? Load user by username. So based on the username, we need to retrieve the user record. And what we need to return? User details object we have to return. How do we retrieve the user record from the database? By using our repository. So let us inject our repository here. Private customer repository is available. Customer repository. Let us do auto wiring. So I know the username. Then can I retrieve the record based on the username? Can I retrieve the record based on the username? I can retrieve the record based on the username. So crepo dot find by username with the given username. Find by username with the given username. With this I got my customer object. Earlier we used to create our own service directly, but now we are creating a service by implementing Spring Security service. So what is the service given by the Spring Security? User details service it has given. Right. So in that user detail service, what is the method available? Load user by username method is available. We are overriding this method. So what is the logic we need to write? We need to retrieve our user record from the table, and we need to return that record in the form of user details object. How do we do that? Here we are going to specify new user username. The username is available in the customer object. Customer dot get username, customer dot get a password. Do we have any roles for the customer to represent? Currently we don't have any roles. So I'm going to say collections dot empty list. Currently this user does not have any roles. So this user does not have any roles. Then I'm going to return that user object. I'm going to return that user object. So look at that. So I'm creating one service which is implementing user details service interface in the Spring. So what is the logic I'm writing for this? This is the logic which is used to retrieve the record, guys. When user is trying to log in, we need to retrieve the database record based on the given username. So we need to perform the authentication. We need to retrieve the record from the database and we need to perform the authentication. So to retrieve the record from the database, we are writing one service class. Inside the service class, we are overriding this method. What is this method name? Load user by username. Based on the username, I'm retrieving the record based on the repository. Inside the repository, we are having a find by method. So whatever the customer record we are getting, that customer record I'm representing in the form of user object. This user is also user is a predefined class in the Spring Security. Whatever the customer record we are getting, that customer record we are representing in the form of user object. So this is the name, username, this is the password. This user does not have any roles. If user is having some roles, we will retrieve the roles also from the roles table and we will set the roles here for the user. Currently the roles are not available, so I'm setting the roles as empty. Roles will be available in the another table. Based on the username, you need to retrieve the roles records also and we need to pass the roles records here. Currently we don't have the roles, so no need to pass that. Good. Look at this class, which is user details service, which is user details service, which is used to retrieve user record from the database table. User details service, which is used to retrieve the record from user details service table. Okay, good. So with this, one concept is done, guys. What we have created now? Detail service we have created. What we have done in the detail service? Implementing that. So when we implement a interface, we need to override the method. What is the method we are overriding? Load user by username. So what is that method is going to do? Retrieve the record and it is going to return the record in the form of user details object. Got it? Fine. Now who should use this method? Am I going to call this method to retrieve the record or security should call this method? Spring Security should call this method. So I need to tell to Spring Security, you need to load the user record from this class. So it has to retrieve the user records from this class. For that, in the security configuration, we will write one method to tell that from where it is going to get the user's data. You need to get the user's data by using user details service. You have to retrieve the user data by using user details service. For that, we will write one method like this. We will write one method like this, which is configure users method. What is the method available? Configure users method is available. Now, let us take this method. Configure users method. So in this configure user service method, we are going to specify what is our service. Private, my user details service, which is user details service. Let me inject my user details service here and password encoder also I'm going to configure. So I'm writing one method with a name called configure users. For the configure users, what is the parameter? Authentication manager builder. For the authentication manager builder, what we are setting? For the authentication manager builder, we are setting which is service it should use to retrieve the user data. It has to use user detail service to retrieve the data, and here user data will be in the encoded format. For that, you have to use this bcrypt encoder. So for this authentication manager builder, I'm setting what is the user detail service and what is the password encoder. Password encoder we already represented as a bin here. User detail service we are injecting by using auto wiring. So for this authentication manager, we are telling what is user detail service, which is used to retrieve the user record, and what is our password encoder. Are you guys clear with this one? Any confusion? Look at this method. We created two things now. I created one service class, and I have configured that user details by using one method called configure users method. What is the meaning of configure users? We are telling from where users data it has to retrieve for the authentication purpose. Then next we need to configure authentication provider and authentication manager. What is the meaning of authentication provider? It will provide the information which is required for the authentication. What is authentication manager? Who will perform actual authentication? Authentication manager will perform actual authentication. Authentication provider will provide the details which are required to perform that authentication. Now, so those beans also we have to customize. In order to customize those beans, authentication provider will be available, authentication manager will be available. Let us see this information here. Authentication provider we are creating. DAO authentication provider we have taken, and for the authentication provider we need to set the user detail service and we need to set the password encoder. Password encoder is already available as a bean. Let us take the password encoder. User details service. My user detail service bean is available. Set user detail service. We are setting the user detail service here which are injected, and password is available. We are configuring the password encoder. And here authentication manager, we are taking the authentication configuration and we are returning the authentication manager bin. So here provider is available. For the provider we are setting the user details and we are setting the password. And authentication manager is available. We are taking the configuration object. From the configuration object, we are getting the manager and we are representing that manager as a Spring Bean. Okay. Now, so with this, our security configuration is ready. Let us go for login functionality in the REST controller. So let's write one login functionality. Public string login check. Login check. For login check also we need username and password. So that also we are going to take as a in the form of customer object. Customer object. The data will be coming in the form of request body. The data is coming in the form of request body. Login method also will be available as a post mapping. Login method also available as a post mapping. Now here inside this login check method, in order to validate the credentials are valid or not, we need to inject authentication manager. Private authentication manager. Private authentication manager is available. We already customized authentication manager in our application by using authentication configuration. This authentication manager object I'm injecting into my REST controller. Now, using this authentication manager, we need to perform the authentication. In order to perform that authentication, we need to set our credentials which are coming in the request. Authentication manager dot authenticate. Authentication manager dot authenticate method is available. For this authenticate method, we need to pass our user details, username and password. How we are getting the username and password? In the form of request body. But what this authenticate method is expecting? Authentication object it is expecting. So it is not expecting the username and password directly. It is expecting the username and password in the form of authentication object. How to pass that authentication object? Here we are going to take authentication username and password token will be available. Username password token will be available. Username password authentication token. We need to pass username comma password comma roles that are required. I'm going to pass only username and password, which is my customer dot get username, customer dot get username, customer dot get password. Right. We are passing that token. We are creating the token with username and password. Token we are passing to authenticate method. So when I pass this authenticate, call authenticate method, authenticate object is coming. Okay. Now authenticate dot is authenticated. Dot is authenticated. That means valid credentials. Otherwise, it is invalid credentials. So if it is authenticated, I will return a message, welcome to Ashokat. If it is invalid, then I will return a message, invalid credentials. This is Spring Security login, guys. Yeah. So this is our login method. So what we are doing in the login method? In the login method, we are taking customer data in the request body. We are taking the customer data in the request body. With that customer data, I'm creating one token object because we are not directly writing the login check. Login should be taken care by Spring Security. To perform the login with the Spring Security, we need to give some information to the Spring Security Authentication Manager. So for the Authentication Manager, we are giving the information in the form of one token object. And we are telling to authenticate this token. Hey, Spring Security, you take this token. In the token, my username and password is available. With that username and password, you perform the authentication. After performing the authentication, it will give you authentication object. Authentication dot is authenticated. Authentication dot is authenticated, nothing but that means the credentials are valid or invalid. If it is true, nothing but credentials are valid. I'm giving a success message. Welcome to Ashokite. You are logged in successfully. If your authentication is not happened successfully, then it will go to the else block and it is going to return invalid credentials. Are you able to follow? Let's try this once. Is it working or not? Refresh. Run as boot application.
Mapping, you forgot to put.
Yeah, application started. Now, default password is printing on the console. Default password is not printing on the console. Not printing. Why? We have customized our authentication configuration here. Clear the console. Go to browser. Now, register is already completed. Shall I go with the login now? Shall I go with login? Yeah. Go to login. No need to pass the password, phone number. I'm giving my username and password. Initially, let us give wrong password. Let us see what is the behavior. So go to our console and clear the console and check this. Click on send. When I send the request, what is saying? Not found. URL pattern. What is the URL pattern? Oh, what is the problem? URL pattern available or not available? Not available. So let me give the URL pattern as login. Okay. So with this, clear. Go to Postman. Then do the login with the wrong credentials. Forbidden. What it is saying, guys? It is saying bad credentials. Let me give the correct credentials. Click on send. Now we are getting the message as welcome to Ashokite. So if I give wrong username, click on send, then what it is saying 403 forbidden, internal authentication service exception, cannot invoke that. We are getting some exception here. We are getting the exception. If you want to catch this exception, what is the status code we are getting? 403. What is the meaning of 403? Credentials are invalid. Your authentication is failed. Now, but actually when the authentication is failed, I want to send a meaningful message. If I want to send a meaningful message, what I will do is, let me perform this authentication by using try catch block. I want to catch the exception. Catch exception E. Let's write a logger to catch the exception. Now, this logic I will write inside this method. I will write this logic inside this method. Then I will write this logic here. If is authenticated, then it is going to return welcome to Ashok IT. If it is not authenticated, I will eat that exception and I'm going to return a meaningful message to the client saying that these are invalid credentials. Here logger will come, guys. We will write a logger why the exception is occurred. Okay. So if authentication is successful, condition will be satisfied, success message will come. If authentication is not satisfied, here exception will come. If the authentication is failed, exception will come. I'm eating that exception. I'm not doing anything with the exception at this moment. I'm returning invalid credentials message. Let's try this. So I'm keeping in the try catch block. The reason is whenever you call this predefined authenticate method, if credentials are valid, no problem. If credentials are invalid, 403 exception is coming, bad credentials message. Run this again. Yeah, login with wrong credentials. Now, what is the response we are getting? Last time we got the exception stack trace. So I'm eating that exception by writing an empty catch block. Then I am returning a meaningful error message saying that invalid credentials. Now give valid credentials. Click on send. Now, if I give the valid credentials, I'm getting welcome to Ashok. My authentication is successful. I'm able to access my application. Let us do the registration also now. Go for register. Let us register one more user. Okay. So give different username, some RAM. Password is rom@123. Right. So go to the database, check in the table, select star from customer. How many records available currently? Only one record is available. Ashok user record is available. Now let us register. I'm changing the URL pattern. I'm sending the user data in the request body as a JSON. Click on send. So user registered. Go to the database, select star from customer. Then second record is inserted, password stored in the encrypted format. Now, can we try to log in as a ROM? Can we try to log in as a ROM now? Yes. So change the URL pattern 8081/login. So no need to give the password for the login. Only username and no need to give the phone number. We need to give only username and password for the login. Let me give wrong password. rom@1234. See the response that we are getting from the API. Click on send. What is the response? Invalid credentials. So now if I give valid password, click on send. Valid password, welcome to Ashok. So user able to register, user able to log in with the help of Spring Security. So here registration is a manual process. We are directly inserting the record into table. We are taking the user record and we are inserting that user record into table. But a login, is it a normal login or it is a Spring Security login? It is a Spring Security login by using Authentication Manager. Who is performing the authentication process? Programmer or Authentication Manager? Authentication Manager. So here I have injected my Authentication Manager into my REST controller. In my REST controller, I have injected Authentication Manager. For the in the Authentication Manager, there is a method available. Authenticate method is available. For the authenticate method, what is required? Token is required. What token? Username password token is required. So I created username password authentication token by setting the given username and password in the login functionality. That token I am passing to authenticate method. So this will return the authentication object. If it is successful, then is authenticated is true. Otherwise, is authenticated is false. It is throwing some exception if the credentials are wrong. If I'm writing in the try catch block to handle that exception. If exception occurred, logger will be available. Then I will return a message called invalid credential. So if it is, suppose I don't want to return 200 status code. I don't want to return 200 status code. Can we customize the status code also? How can we customize? Response entity of string. Response entity of string. Then what we will do here? Return new response entity of body comma status code. In the body, I will write welcome to Ashoka IT. And the status code I will set as 200. It is a valid login. So I can set the status code HTTP status dot OK. HTTP status dot OK. Here what I am going to set as a status code, it is a bad request, right? Bad credential, it is a bad request. So return new response entity, body comma status code. What is the body I am going to set? Invalid credentials. And what is the status code? Bad request. HTTP status dot bad request. So that is 400 status code will go. So if you want to say some other exception status code also, you can set whatever you want. Bad request. If it is valid data, then it is success status code with 200. If it is invalid credential, bad request with the 400 status code we are sending to the client. Now test this functionality now. Go to login with 1234. Earlier for invalid also we got 200. Now 1234 I am giving. Click on send. Invalid credentials. What is the status code? Bad request is coming. Now give the status code. See the status code for the valid credentials. Send the request. 200 status code. Welcome to Ashoka. That means authentication got a success. Yeah. So this is Spring Security with login and registration. Spring Security with login and registration. Look at this code. So for new people, the confusion in the configuration class, what all the informations that we are configuring. User detail service we are configuring. Password encoder we are configuring. I think this method also we can skip. Let's try. We are not using that configure users because already for the provider we are setting the detail service here. Let me stop and start this again. Refresh project, clean the project, run as boot application. Yeah. Perfect. So configure users, no need to do separately because already we are setting the user details here. So which is going to load the user data, and here password encoder is available. So security filter already we know, which is used to decide which request should allow, which request should not be allowed. Authentication manager to perform the authentication in the application. Authentication provider will understand from where it has to load the data. To load the data, we are using user detail service. Password encoder is available, which is used to encrypt our password at the time of registration and at the time of login also. So this is our configuration class, security configuration class. Okay. And if you see the REST controller, registration method is straightforward. No need to do any changes here. Directly we are encrypting the password and saving the record. In the authentication, not lighting the logic directly, we are using Spring authentication mechanism to perform this authentication. Good. Fine, guys. Look at this diagram. Are we able to configure all these things? REST controller is available. User detail service is available. Security configuration, password encoder is available. Authentication provider is available. Authentication manager is available. Filter chain is available. And we have one repository also. Here this service is communicating with the repository, and our application can communicate with this service to load the data, right? And this repository will communicate with the database, and there is one entity also. Look at this diagram. Spring Security with login and registration. Good. So tomorrow we are going to learn about OAuth authentication. Today, please practice this. I will push this code to GitHub repository and I will share the link in the notes. So please practice this before coming to tomorrow's session. Tomorrow we will learn about OAuth authentication. Okay, good guys. Any questions, anyone?
Hi, Ashok.
Sir, what is CSRF?
Guys, online students, so give me 2 minutes. Yeah. Authentication provider means, so who is giving the data to perform the authentication process? Where is your data available to perform the authentication? So the data is giving by our service. Okay, so that service information we are setting to the authentication provider. That means it will use that service to load the user data to perform the authentication. Okay, yeah. Yes, I have inserted 2 customers. 2 customers can log in. We need to do the unique check, right? At the time of registration, you need to keep a condition. If user is already registered with the same name, we should not allow them. So here, when you go for the registration, directly I'm inserting the record into table. So here, before inserting this record into table, check customer is already available with the same name or same email ID. You can check that, right? Duplicate check you can do now. You can do the duplicate check. You try to retrieve the record available in the database with the same name. If record is not available, then only you insert that record. If record is already available, you don't insert that record, so that you can maintain unique records in the table. That is programmer logic. Security cannot deal with that.
Hi, sir. So
Yes.
can you please show me the diagram? Sir, as per diagram here say that.
Sir, here I'm calling the repository method, right? If you don't want, you can write one method in this service, and from the service you can call that method in the controller. I did not get you.
Sir, can you please show me the diagram?
1 minute, sir. Service class, it is used by Spring security to load the user data. Which method? Oh, configuration. Okay, yeah. One minute, one by one. So this is authentication provider. So Dove authentication provider we are using, and we are representing. So this Dove authentication provider should retrieve the user record by using user detail service. And at the time of retrieving the record, password will be in the encrypted format, right? So when it has to compare the passwords, it should use the same password encoder which we have used here. This is the authentication provider. So authentication provider is an interface. For the authentication provider interface, there are multiple implementations will be available. One of the implementation is Dove authentication provider.
చెప్పనండి ఇంట్లోనే.
Got it? Yeah. Online students, any questions, anyone?
Sir, I have
Sir,
2
what
questions.
is CSRF?
Sorry? Sir, CSRF
What is
cross-repository,
CSRF?
sir. CSRF nothing but cross-site issues will be available. We are removing that now.
Like example means
Cross-site request. So I will discuss that part. CSRF.
Hello.
Cross-origin CSRF issues will be available. We are disabling those cross-forgery sites. Cross-site forgery, basically.
Hi, Ashok. Is there any relation between authentication provider and the authentication manager? Like
Yes,
how
sir.
the
Authentication manager, when it is trying to do the authentication, internally it will communicate with the provider only to retrieve the data.
Hello, Ashok sir.
Okay. Ashok, one more question is like, can we provide the external encryption? Like, externally, can we provide the?
Yeah, externally also you can provide it. You can do that. You need to set that customized object here.
Okay. How can we do that actually, Ashok? Like, do we
You need to write
create...
your own class and you need to set that.
Okay, we need to set that external object to that.
Yes, you need to write your
password
own class
encoding.
and you need to set that external object.
Okay. Are we going to discuss that part also? Like,
I will try. I have not used it that any external one. We used only this bcrypt one. Let me see that example. If I get it, I will do.
Sure. Thanks.
Sir, what is the alternative to this deprecated method, sir?
This deprecated method alternate directly you need to write authorized request. In the previous example we have done that configuration we can add it. So if you want to remove this deprecated one, simply you can take this security filter that we have configured earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, this one you can take this logic.
Okay, sir. Yeah. And one more thing, sir.
This
Sir,
method also
sir,
represent, I think.
sir, one
Yeah.
question, sir. If it is
Yeah.
a monolithic application, I can go for Spring Security. If it is a microservices kind of application, either you are going to discuss JWT authentication. Can I assume like that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Would you be showing us demo for
So
Amazon
what is
Secrets?
the
Sir, microservice security JWT, we will discuss that.
Hello,
Yes, sir.
Ashok sir.
Yeah.
Will you be showing us demo for
Sir, multiple
Amazon
people
Secrets?
asking at a time. I'm not understanding.
Ashok sir, I'll
Tell
ask.
me.
I want to know whether you will be showing us demo for Amazon Secrets to store the password.
Angular secrets.
Amazon Secrets.
Amazon secrets. No, sir. No, I have no idea on that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, what is the case if we want to give the user the flexibility to log in either via username, user ID or user email?
No, sir. Generally, when you are implementing, I mean, if you want to implement that with multiple, I mean to say either name or email or mobile number, anything that you mean to say. So here,
Yes, sir.
for that, you need to change your query. So in the repository, you are writing the find by name, right? So
Yes,
you
sir.
need to write a query with the like operator. You need to write your custom query at the time of retrieving the record.
Okay.
Here we are retrieving with only by username, right? So you need to
Yes,
write
sir.
find by username or find by mobile or find by email. You need to change this method to retrieve the record.
Okay. Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
Good.
Sir, what is the shortcut that you're using to assign local variable?
Control 1, sir.
Control 1.
Yeah.
Okay. So this Spring Security we cannot use for microservice, right?
Yes, we can do that. I will show you that also.
No. This is Spring Security.
Yeah.
Whatever JDBC.
Yes. Same thing. I will implement in the JWT also. We need same concept.
Okay. If it is same, why we need to discuss over there?
That is token based authentication, sir. I mean, so this coding will be available. On top of this, some extra configuration will be available for the JWT.
Okay, sir.
One extra filter will come. One extra token generation class will be available. That's it.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. Good, guys. With this, I'm stopping for today and we'll connect tomorrow. And remember, if you develop this application, then only you will understand the JWT also, because whatever the code we have done, exact same project we will use for the JWT. Extra 2 more classes will be added in the same project. Then we can discuss on the JWT. Same code will be available. Extra configuration, token generation part will be available. Token validation part will be available. For that, 2 more extra classes will be added to the same project if you want to add JWT token security for the application. So practice this application today and understand how it is working. If you don't understand this, if you don't practice this, you will not get the clarity when we are working with the JWT authentication also. So whatever the code we have done today, same code, same method, everything will be available. 2 more extra classes will be added. One class will be for token generation. One class will be for token validation. That's it. That is called JWT authentication. So please take care of this project today that we have developed. I will push this code to Git repository and I will share the Git repository URL in the notes. Good. Thank you.